It's June 1st, 1943. 8 German Junkers Ju-88 dive bombers intercept a clearly marked civilian aircraft, BOAC Flight 777, over the Bay of Biscay. Inside, among the terrified passengers, sits a heavy-set man with a cigar clenched between his teeth. His silhouette is unmistakable. Next to him, a Hollywood superstar, long suspected of spying for the British. Without hesitation, the first shot is fired. The radio operator's frantic message cuts through the chaos. Quote, "I'm attacked by enemy aircraft." This wasn't a mistake. German intelligence officers, watching from a Lufthansa plane, had reported the men boarding Flight 777 with absolute certainty. Bringing down the plane they believed could change the course of the entire war. Target Churchill. Leslie Howard sensed it the moment he stepped into the airport, a weight in the air. Eyes on him were not unusual for a Hollywood star, but this felt different. The lead man of Gone with the Wind was sure something was wrong. That summer morning, he had told his wife, quote, "I have a queer feeling about this whole trip." He couldn't shake it. Weeks earlier, the very same Douglas DC-3 he was about to board had barely survived a mysterious attack by German fighters over the Bay of Biscay. At the gate, he and his manager, Alfred T. Chennels, waited to board. Chennels was an imposing, heavy-set man, always covered in the smoke of his cigar. His friends often told him he looked just like British Prime Minister Winston Churchill. The two men couldn't have known it, but at that moment, German intelligence was abuzz with reports claiming Churchill was returning from North Africa, where he had met with Allied leaders. If the Axis could intercept him in transit, it would be a devastating blow to the war effort. Suddenly, you had a man who looked just like Churchill at Lisbon's Portela Airport, accompanied by none other than Leslie Howard, the famous actor who had recently devoted himself to crafting anti-Nazi propaganda. Among the passengers were Reuters correspondent Kenneth Stonehouse and Terrell Shervington, Shell Oil's Lisbon branch manager. Shervington, too, had confided in his wife that he had a disturbing dream of the plane being shot down. As he walked into the building, Stonehouse muttered to a friend, quote, "I'm not normally frightened, but somehow I feel bad about this air trip. I wish that I could go to sleep here and wake up at some English airfield." Their flight, number 777, aboard a Douglas DC-3 named Ibis, was already surrounded by a strange air of foreboding. Stranger still was the last-minute seating rearrangement. 2 passengers, a nanny named Dora Rowe and a young boy, Derek Partridge, were inexplicably bumped from the flight to accommodate Howard and his associate. Another intended traveler, Father A.S. Holmes, was about to board when he was called to an urgent phone message from either the British Embassy or the Papal Nunciature. The priest left his place in the boarding line to take the call, only to discover that no such call had been received. By the time he returned, the plane had departed without him. The origin to the mysterious message remain unknown to this day. The Ibis climbed to 9,000 feet as it veered toward England. A few minutes later, a German omnidirectional navigation beam locked onto the aircraft's signal as it reached Cape Viano. Simultaneously, across the Bay of Biscay, 8 German Junkers Ju-88 bombers lifted quietly from their bases in occupied France. Whether their orders were to intercept an aircraft, provide cover for submarines, or something far more sinister, no official record would ever reveal. At precisely 1 p.m., fate caught up with Ibis. The sky above the Atlantic exploded with cannon fire. Ju-88s bore down on the helpless civilian airliner, their machine guns raking through its fuselage. Inside, the wireless operator tapped out a desperate Morse code message, quote, "From GAGBB, I'm followed by unidentified aircraft. I'm attacked by enemy aircraft." Then, silence. Flames gripped the DC-3's hull, forcing the pilot into a sharp dive as he attempted to lose the German warplanes. He was doing exactly what the other pilot had done weeks before. This time, however, there would be no escape. The aircraft transformed into a ball of fire and smoke as it spiraled down, finally plunging into the ocean. Moments later, the German pilot circled above, snapping photographs of the floating wreckage before returning to base. There were no survivors. 3 days later, the New York Times reported the chilling speculation that gripped London. The attack was no coincidence. The Nazis, they wrote, had struck down Flight 777 on the belief that Winston Churchill himself might have been on board. Mistaken identity. After the attack, both the British and Portuguese air authorities were shocked at an armed belligerent shooting down an unarmed, clearly marked civilian airliner in broad daylight. Despite being wartime, it was an international scandal, mainly because Portugal was a neutral nation, one that welcomed both British and German travelers. And this attack was an attempt against their neutrality. It raised immediate concerns about whether Portuguese sovereignty and neutrality could be maintained in a war that seemed to have no regard for such considerations. The Portuguese authorities were sure that such an event would never happen, and that the earlier attack of April 19th had been just an accident caused by confused German pilots who had refused to reroute the air routes farther out over the Atlantic. Nor did they reschedule to fly under the cover of darkness. This call was based on the firm belief that there was no way either Axis or Allied forces would risk provoking Portugal, one of the last neutral hubs in Europe. The German attack shattered this illusion. The event was particularly felt across the world due to the untimely loss of Leslie Howard, a beloved Hollywood actor in the prime of his career and an emblem of British cultural influence. The event shuttered the entertainment industry and the political landscape. Many suspected there was more at play. The Germans made so many conflicting claims about the plane: that it was covered in camouflage paint, that it was a bomber, that it was escorted by British bombers, that an air battle had been fought, that the crew had bailed out and left the passengers to be shot down, that the plane carried contraband. At one time or another, the Germans tried almost every conceivable theory to explain why they had shot down the civilian plane. The world demanded answers, and soon Winston Churchill himself emerged to provide them. The Prime Minister described the incident as one of, quote, the inscrutable workings of fate. This suggested Churchill had, in fact, been the target of the Flight 777 attack. Churchill's words fueled speculation that the Germans had mistakenly believed he himself was on board the doomed aircraft. After the war, when the Allies revealed Operation Ultra and the fact that, with the help of British cryptologists, including Alan Turing, Gordon Welchman, and Hugh Alexander, they'd been able to break the German Enigma code, reports surfaced revealing that the British had actually intercepted Luftwaffe radio communications prior to the attack. They knew the German fighters were coming for Flight 777. More strikingly, they knew that the Germans believed Churchill was aboard the plane. Churchill himself was content to let the world believe that this egregious attack was simply a case of German intelligence failure and mistaken identity. This version of events painted the Germans as both inept and ruthless, but it also served a much more strategic purpose. It helped conceal a more profound, more complex truth about who Leslie Howard really was. Not wanting to wait for third-party investigations to learn the truth about what happened to his father, English actor and writer Ronald Howard made it his mission to uncover the truth of why his father had been targeted. His investigation would lead him straight into a web of incredible theories, ranging from espionage to betrayal and international contraband. Hollywood spy. Hitler's Minister of Propaganda, Joseph Goebbels, knew Howard very well and considered him a dangerous adversary. He even suggested he might be his British counterpart. Goebbels was certain the Hollywood actor was directly aiding Churchill, using his celebrity status to infiltrate German circles and gather intelligence to aid the British war effort. Author Gerald M. Packard recounted, quote, Goebbels had seen Howard's 1941 film Pimpernel Smith and decided to get the man who not only starred in this attack on the Reich, but who directed and produced it as well. Goebbels loathed Howard, not just professionally, but personally. He called the actor, quote, Britain's most dangerous propagandist. He also reportedly harbored resentment over a pre-war romance between Howard and a famous unnamed actress, one with whom Goebbels himself was infatuated. This deep-seated animosity, coupled with suspicions that Howard was actively working against the Reich, painted a target on his back. Ronald Howard refused to accept that his father was a spy. While he acknowledged Goebbels' hatred and was certain the Germans believed Leslie had been a spy, he claimed it was impossible for him to actually operate as an intelligence agent. Yet the truth hinted at something far more intriguing. One of the most startling revelations concerns Howard's journey to Iberia in 1943. Officially described as a promotional tour for an upcoming film, newly uncovered historical records show that Britain's Foreign Office meticulously arranged the trip as part of a covert strategy, aiming to curb German influence and subtly encourage Spain's continued neutrality during the war. Spanish author José Rey Jimena brought to light a remarkable revelation from actress Conchita Montenegro. On her deathbed, Montenegro, Howard's co-star in the 1931 film Never the Twain Shall Meet, revealed she had secretly arranged a meeting between Howard and General Franco. She maintained that Howard delivered a confidential message from Winston Churchill himself, cautioning Franco against supporting the Axis powers in World War II. Given Montenegro's marriage to Ricardo Jimenez Arnau, a prominent diplomat and influential political figure in Franco's inner circle, her statement carries considerable credibility. What makes these events even more likely was the well-documented direct involvement of British Foreign Secretary Anthony Eden, who personally persuaded Howard to undertake this mission, an extraordinary measure if Howard's role had indeed been limited to mere public relations. Perhaps the most damning evidence of all lies in the British intelligence files on Howard, which for some reason remained sealed until 2056, an unusually long classification period for wartime documents. Yet eyewitnesses in Lisbon paint a different picture. In the days before the flight, several private meetings were held with British diplomats and intelligence officers stationed in Portugal. This seems to suggest Howard was more than an ambassador, and that he was indeed connected with British intelligence agencies. Taken with the revelations from Montenegro, Eden's quiet involvement, the attention of German intelligence, and the classified files held by MI5 and MI6, a very likely possibility starts to take form. Leslie Howard wasn't just a film star caught in the chaos of war. He was part of something far more complex. Still, Ronald Howard remained unconvinced. Even after years of meticulous research, he firmly believed his father had never truly been a spy. What he did find painted a subtler picture. Leslie Howard as a trusted intermediary, someone who moved in diplomatic circles, occasionally tasked with passing along sensitive messages, but far from a trained operative. In Ronald's view, later historians misread the nature of these discreet assignments, mistaking them for acts of espionage. Even if Howard wasn't a full-fledged spy and more of a propagandist, the Germans had plenty of reasons to eliminate him. And to make the target even more attractive, Flight 777 carried several other high-profile passengers that could make the attack worth their time. Lifetime opportunity. During the war, Portugal occupied a rare and precarious position. As one of the last neutral countries in Western Europe, it held enormous value, too important for either the Axis or the Allies to ignore, and too risky for either to provoke outright. Lisbon especially turned into a den where spies, double agents, defectors, and diplomats all moved in silence, each trying to tip the balance without breaking the illusion of peace. The city was called, by those who knew it, Europe's spy capital. Hotels, foreign embassies, and cafes, even the legendary Hotel Palacio Estoril, were brimming with spies. Opponents often sat just tables apart, trading glances over espresso, knowing who they were and smiling anyway. At the center of it all was Porteo Airport, an unassuming strip of tarmac that served as the last lifeline out of Axis-controlled Europe, linking the continent to Britain. From here, countless figures boarded flights into uncertainty, knowing the wrong eyes might be watching. The British Overseas Airways Corporation, or BOAC, ran these flights officially as a civilian airline, but passengers often carried secrets crucial enough to shift the war's balance. Spies transported critical intelligence, and refugees escaping Nazi persecution depended on these flights as their last hope. It was a tense situation. Axis agents quietly roamed the terminals, carefully watching faces in the crowd, searching for anyone they'd seen in intelligence reports. One mistake, a single careless word, could mean catastrophe. Among the passengers on Flight 777 was Wilfred Israel, a man who had become both the hero and a prime enemy of the Nazis. A British-German Jewish businessman, Israel risked his life organizing daring rescue operations to help Jews trapped behind Nazi lines. He was deeply connected with international relief groups, which made him especially dangerous to Nazi propaganda efforts. By personally saving thousands of lives, he caught the attention and anger of German intelligence. Recently declassified documents show just how closely the Nazis were watching him. They saw the man as a real threat, someone capable of using his platform to expose their infamous final solution in all of its dreadful reach. Taking him out would have been a major blow to Jewish resistance networks, and when Flight 777 appeared on their radar, it offered a rare and convenient opportunity to silence him. Another intriguing passenger was Torrell Shervington. Officially, he was just a Shell oil manager and a British diplomatic courier, responsible for safe documents of national interest between embassies. But beneath this official role, Shervington was the real thing, a British spy. His presence alone made destroying the flight worth their while. But his story didn't stop there. Shervington had spent years gathering intelligence for the Allied war effort. The Germans suspected his true activities, but had never been able to catch him. Eliminating Shervington would disrupt Allied intelligence at a critical moment. A possible intelligence misstep added yet another twist to the story. Some accounts claim German sources mistakenly believed the British spy Frank Foley was on board the doomed plane. Foley was known for rescuing Jewish refugees and consistently undermining Gestapo operations across the Greater Reich. He was high on their most wanted list, and he was a prime target for elimination. But the intel was wrong. He was never on Flight 777. Even so, the passenger list read like a who's who of wartime intrigue. Spies, couriers, resistance figures, and diplomats. This was no routine civilian flight. At a time when information could shift the course of the war as surely as tanks or troops, the Germans recognized a rare opportunity. Whether by design or dumb luck, they had a chance to take out multiple high-value targets in one strike. Then came the testimony from the pilots responsible, and with it, a different version of events. The pilots. Ronald Howard continued to research the death of his father, and soon he stumbled into an entirely new possible cause. What if the 8 German pilots hadn't actually been following orders from German high command? What if the attack had just been a rash decision made by reckless airmen eager for action? This theory has been supported by Ben Rosevink, a retired researcher from the University of Bristol. His interest in the case was deeply personal. His father, Engbertus Rosevink, served as a flight engineer on BOAC Flight 777. In the 1980s, Ben Rosevink sat down with 3 of the German pilots involved in the attack. Their accounts, though decades removed from the event, lined up in a way that was both consistent and unsettling. They insisted they'd never been given direct orders to shoot. Instead, they claimed the strike was a tragic error. They had mistaken the civilian DC-3 for a military target. But the story doesn't end there. The Luftwaffe's explanations over the years changed, never fully accounting for the incident, and notably, no pilot was ever disciplined. One plausible reason is simple. Admitting to the downing of an unarmed civilian plane, one carrying neutral and Allied passengers, would have been a diplomatic and propaganda disaster. Rather than confront that fallout, it appears the German military layered the truth in confusion, shielding the pilots and protecting the reputation of the Luftwaffe, even at the cost of clarity. Closely related to this theory is the notion that the 8 German pilots acted of their own volition, deciding to shoot down the civilian aircraft simply because they could. This idea is supported by an Air Ministry report cited in A Quite Remarkable Father, the autobiography of Leslie Howard, written by his daughter, Leslie Ruth Howard. The report states, quote, "The 8 aircraft were briefed to protect 2 U-boats and to undertake a rescue search. They failed to sight the U-boats, and as the weather was unfavorable, they were probably on their way back to base when a DC-3 was sighted. There's no evidence to suggest the crews had orders to attack this particular aircraft. They would, however, undoubtedly consider it their duty to attack any Allied aircraft encountered in the course of their normal operational flights. Due to the Luftwaffe's aggressive behavior when it came to Allied aircraft entering contested air, it can be assumed the German pilots considered the DC-3 a valid target, even though it clearly had civilian markings. Still, there's reason to be skeptical. This conclusion is based on British government sources, the same government that has kept critical documents regarding the incident sealed for nearly 70 years. More evidence for this perspective appears in the book Soldaten, which includes a disturbing transcript of a conversation among German pilots talking openly about the attack. One pilot, identified as Doc, describes the incident in chilling detail while laughing, quote, "Whatever crossed our path was shot down. Once we even shot down. There were all sorts of bigwigs in it. 17 people, a crew of 4 and 14 passengers. They came from London. There was a famous English film star in it too, Howard. The English radio announced it in the evening. Those civil aircraft pilots knew something about flying. We stood the aircraft on its head with the 14 passengers. They must all have hung on the ceiling. It flew at about 3,200 meters. Such a silly dog. Instead of flying straight ahead when he saw us, he started to take evasive action. Then we got him. Then we let him have it all right. He wanted to get away from us by putting on speed. Then he started to bank. Then the first one of us was after him, and then another. All we had to do was press the button, quietly and calmly." The laughter in the pilot's story is nothing short of frightening, and reveals how these Luftwaffe pilots viewed their actions. There was no tragic mistake, no carefully ordered mission. and the attack was carried out without concern for consequences. The pilots seemed to enjoy the chase, talking about it more like a game than a serious act of war. If they were not ordered to fire, as Rosevink's interviews suggest, then they made the choice themselves, either out of a desire to engage any Allied aircraft they encountered, or simply to claim an easy victory for their tally. The aftermath of the attack further complicates the theory. The very next day, Allied forces conducted a search operation in the area where the Ibis had gone down, based on the last known coordinates from radio contact. A short Sunderland flying boat from No. 461 Squadron RAAF, or N461, was dispatched to look for debris, but was itself attacked by 8 Ju-88s, the very same type of aircraft that had brought down Flight 777. In a fierce battle, the Sunderland managed to shoot down 3 of the attacking planes and scored 3 additional probable victories before crash landing at Prassans, near Penzance. The possibility that Flight 777 was shot down not because of high-profile targets on board, nor because of an explicit mission directive, but rather as an impulsive act of war, remains a troubling yet plausible explanation. The secret files. Theories surrounding the downing of BOAC Flight 777 come by the dozen, but one fact is undeniable. Winston Churchill insisted it was a case of mistaken identity, a claim that collapses under scrutiny. Churchill never traveled on civilian aircraft. His security detail would not have allowed it. And the Germans, with their capable intelligence network, would not have confused a commercial DC-3 with a military transport carrying the British Prime Minister. Yet Churchill stood by this version of events. More troubling still, British intelligence had intercepted Lufthansa communications, indicating that the Germans believed Churchill was on board. If this intelligence was genuine, Flight 777 should have been escorted, at least warned. The possibility that British intelligence knowingly let the flight be destroyed cannot be ignored. After all, Churchill had once sacrificed Coventry to protect the secret of Britain's ability to decode German messages. Flight 777 could have been another cold calculation, one deemed necessary to preserve a greater strategic advantage. The mistaken identity theory fails further when considering Alfred T. Chennels. He was heavyset and smoked cigars, but the idea that German operatives, who had been tracking Howard and Chennels for weeks, failed to recognize the difference between a film executive and Churchill himself strains belief. Some even speculate that Chennels was working as a Churchill decoy. Even the idea that Leslie Howard willingly sacrificed himself for the war effort is riddled with contradictions. Friends and family insist he would never have boarded a flight knowing it was doomed, especially not one carrying civilians. Former CIA officer Joseph B. Smith later revealed that in 1957, the NSA briefed him on the need for continued secrecy surrounding the incident. If it was an accident, then why hide the truth for so many decades? Everything seems to point to the fact that the attack wasn't random. The German ambush was a coordinated and ruthless display of aerial lethality over neutral skies. Those responsible openly bragged about it later, even laughing as they mentioned the burning plane crashing into the sea. The truth about Flight 777 remains just out of reach. The conflicting accounts, intelligence mistakes, and decades of secrecy all point to something deeper and darker beneath the surface. Whether it's espionage, deception, or even a calculated sacrifice, the mystery of Flight 777 stays locked away, buried somewhere in Britain's archives.